Welcome to our second last unit, Unit 16. This is on plants, one of my favorite areas. I'm sure you'll realize that tonight. Unfortunately, I'm still doing this with PowerPoint and putting it on YouTube. The other program I had doesn't seem to work, so we'll have to keep it going at this. Sorry about that. Only one more chapter left, and so maybe I'll get that one right. Anyway, why this chapter matters. Humans depend on plants for thousands of products, including food, building materials, fuels, and medicines. Fungus are important decomposers in ecosystems. Exploding human population and the resulting demands for space and resources are causing the extinction of plant species at an unprecedented rate. And the tropical rainforest may be a medicine chest of healing plants that could become extinct before we even know they exist. So understand the functions of terrestrial adaptations from algae to land plants and the relationships between fungus and plant roots from the mycorrhizae and the algae and the fungus to form lichens, which you'll hear about. Truffles, ever hear of truffles? Subterranean reproductive bodies of certain fungus, highly prized by gourmets for their powerful earthly scent. Probably the reason a lot of us have never seen any truffles is because of the price, $116 for 0.05 pounds. Not bad. Truffles and medefungus have been associated with tree roots, a type of symbiosis, an interaction which one species lives in or on another species. The symbiotic relationship between a truffle and a tree helps the plant absorb water and inorganic nutrients, helps the fungus by receiving sugars and organic molecules from the plant. Plants are terrestrial organisms that include forms that have returned to water like water lilies. Plants are multicellular eukaryote, photoautotroph, and makes organic molecules by photosynthesis. Terrestrial habitats, the resources that a photosynthetic organism needs, of course, are light and carbon dioxide from the air and minerals and mineral nutrients and water found in the soil. To be able to do this, you have to have aerial leaf-bearing organs called shoots and subterranean organs called roots for the two environments. The land plant maybe has one advantage over the marine plants in that it doesn't really have any filtered sunlight, so the leaves can perform photosynthesis nicely. The shoots have to support the plant, the water supports the seaweed. The roots have to anchor the plant and absorb water. The whole plant can absorb water and nutrients from the surrounding water. So, one of the, advantages to living in the water is you don't have to have the support. You don't have to worry about something to absorb water. Most plants have mycorrhizae, which are symbiotic associations of fungus and roots, in which fungus absorb water and essential minerals in the soil, provide these materials to a plant, and are nourished by sugars produced by the plant. The mycorrhizae are key adaptations that made possible for plants to live on the land. That's what they look like. They're on the roots. That's why when you try to transplant something, you don't want to rip the plant right out of the ground with just bare roots dangling, because they lose their little water absorption mechanisms. That's another reason why you don't want to throw fungicides on your lawn near the plants, because fungicides for the trees that have this will kill these, and then the whole tree dies, just when you're trying to kill some fungus on your lawn. Leaves are the main photosynthetic organisms in most plants, utilizing stomata, the little microscopic pores you learned about that exchange carbon dioxide and oxygen. Vascular tissue, a system of tube-shaped cells that branch throughout the plant for transport of vital materials, and a waxy coating on the leaves and other aerial parts called the cuticle for the retention of water. Vascular tissues in plants are also found in the roots and the shoots. The types of vascular tissue that exists in land plants are xylem, which transport water and minerals from the roots to the leaves, and the phloem, which distributes sugar from the leaves back to the roots, and other non-photosynthetic parts of the plant. A lot of people think that's all it does, takes it to the roots. But hey, if areas above where the leaf is that produce the sugar, if tips of the leaf of the branch above it need it, it'll go up there as well. Here's what the xylem and the phloem looks like. The xylem are the larger cells, and they're not alive, and the phloem are the smaller cells, and they are alive. That's the vascular tissue. It provides a lot of support for the plant too. You can see the vascular tissue in the leaf. Plants produce their gametes in protective structures called gametangias, which have a jacket of protective cells around a moist chamber so they can develop there without dehydrating. The zygote develops into an embryo while still contained within the female part of the plant, but not in the algae. So there's the embryo inside the development into the ovule of the plant in the female part of the plant. And here's the developing embryo. Algae ancestors came ashore about 500 million years ago, carpeted the fringes of the lakes and the salt marshes, and they evolved in a way that the chlorophytes were able to dry out and then gain water again, and dry out and gain water again, when the water would drop. So they became like the first present day land plants. They're still around. So you got the red algae, the chlorophytes, the green algae, and the chlorophacians and the embryophytes. Our closest relatives for plants was the green algae. Green algae was predominant. The green algae in the ocean was predominant 500 million years ago when it first came ashore. It was only 325 million years ago during the Permian extinction that the red algae took over from the green algae in the ocean. But by that time, the green algae had already migrated onto land, and the mosses, ferns, conifers, and angiosperms all were remnants of them. The history of the plant kingdom is a story of adaptation to diverse terrestrial habitats. The fossil record chronicles 4 major periods of plant evolution which are evident in modern plants. About 475 million years ago, plants originated from an algae ancestor gave rise to bryophytes, non-vascular plants without lignified walls, true walls, or true leaves. They include the mosses, you may have heard of, the liverworts, maybe not, the hornworts, definitely not. About 425 million years ago, ferns and a few other groups of vascular plants evolved, and with vascular tissue hardened with lignin but without seeds. So that were the ferns. Then, 360 million years ago, the first group of organisms evolved with seeds, the gymnosperms, consisted of an embryo, the seed packaged with a store of food, had protective coverings, but where they weren't enclosed in any special chambers, they were just on the cones, naked on the cones, which gets the name gymnosperm, which means naked seed. Today, the conifers are the mainly large cone-bearing trees such as pines and the equivalent and are the most diverse and widespread gymnosperms. About 140 million years ago, angiosperms evolved with a complex reproductive structure called flowers that bear seeds within protective chambers called ovaries. Angiosperms are the great majority of living plants. Obviously, this was the way to go. Fruit and vegetable crops, grains and other grasses, most trees. 250,000 species of angiosperms are out there, which is more than all the other groups put together. So your origin, the first terrestrial adaptation, vascular, then you had bryophytes, vascular tissue, origin of seeds, origin of flowers. So there's your steps up to the angiosperms and how many millions of years ago it was. I mean, the only thing that wasn't around when the Permian extinction occurred was the flowering plants. Bryophytes, non-vascular plants. Ferns, seedless vascular plants. Gymnosperm, naked seed plants. Angiosperms, flowering plants. I always used to say, if you look out the window, all of the plants that you see out there are either gymnosperms or angiosperms. You really would have to look tight to see a moss. I was up in New Jersey a couple of years ago, and in the parking lot next to the hotel we were in, there was a little stream, and the whole bed leading down to the stream was moss. I was like, oops, I told them the wrong thing. But you don't usually see that too often. Here's some pretty bryophytes. The bryophytes are different than the others. The sporophyte generation, this generation that gives rise to spores, is found inside the gametophyte generation, the generation that gives rise to gametes, the sperm and egg cells. In all the other ones, the ferns and the angiosperms and gymnosperms, the sporophyte generation is the predominant generation, and the gametophyte generation is minute in the fern and completely enclosed in the sporophyte generation in the angiosperms and the gymnosperms. Mosses or bryophytes sprawl as low mats over acres of land, need water to reproduce because the sperm that they produce has to swim to reach the eggs in the female gametophyte. They have a waxy cuticle to help prevent dehydration and retain the embryos within the mother plant's gametangium once fertilization has occurred. There's some mosses. All that's missing is some reindeer. Mosses have two distinct forms, the gametophyte, which produces gametes, sporophyte, which produces spores. Got it? Gametophyte, gametes, sporophyte, spores. Coming out of the moss plant like that, you come out and the sporophyte grows right out of the mother plant. It's actually almost, you could call it parasitic on the mother, and it has a spore capsule, which meiosis occurs and a whole bunch of spores form. They take on a coating around them, a cell wall, and when conditions get dry, they'll release them into the wind to try to put them someplace else. This is called alternation of generations, going from the sporophyte generation, the mosses, the spores land and grow into the gametophyte generation. They produce the sporophyte, they may land and grow into the gametophyte, and around it goes. This is a life cycle. Here's your moss. Sperm and egg cells, fertilization, mitosis grows into the sporophyte generation, meiosis occurs in the spore capsules and spores are formed, and they grow into a haploid gametophyte generation. And that's how it goes. This is a close-up I took in my front lawn on some wood in my front lawn. This was taken with an iPhone, so you can actually see this stuff. The little capsules on the top is the sporophyte generation. All the green down below is the gametophyte generation. Some more cool mosses, and more mosses, and more mosses. This moss I found in an elephant park in Port Elizabeth in South Africa. Everybody was running through the pathway to go hide behind the wall to look at the elephants drinking in the water. And I saw this cool tree covered full of moss. So I took pictures of that instead. Well, I got the elephants too, but that was exciting. Look at that moss. Ooh. This moss I found on the top of Table Mountain, never to be seen again. 2003, I saw it, took a picture, couldn't figure out what it was, looked it up, couldn't find it, went back to Table Mountain some years later, and I couldn't find it again. This was 3,000 feet above sea level, and I don't know, it's pretty though. Didn't know they had pretty colors like that. Here you go. Here's the spores being released. Usually when it gets dry, the wind's blowing, and then the wind will move the spores to grow someplace else. Ferns are by far the most diverse seedless plants. There's about 12,000 known species. The sperm of the spores of the sperm of the ferns, like the mosses, have flagella and have to swim through water to fertilize the eggs. Here's underneath, the spore capsules are underneath. I had a student one time who thought that when I showed her this, she freaked out because she thought the fern was diseased and threw it out. And meanwhile, that's just how they form their spores, underneath the leaves like that. New sporophyte generation growing out of the gametophyte generation. There's the spore capsules. There's the little fiddleheads, the young leaves coming out. During the Carboniferous, about 360 to 300, the ferns were part of the great diversity of seedless plants, formed swampy forests over much what is now Eurasia and North America. When they died, they fell into stagnant wetlands, didn't have a chance to decay, and they helped form our coal. Fossil fuels formed from the remains of long dead organisms, including coal, oil, and natural gas. The burning of them releases the carbon dioxide that they trapped as carbohydrates years ago, and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere are contributing to global climate change. There's a coal deposit. There's the spores being released from the fern. Ferns are pretty. That's a tree fern. They actually had one at, I think they had them at Home Depot for about $5 in a pot. They grow pretty good. They grow big. You got to be sure that they don't freeze around here. I have one in my yard that's getting too tall and almost ready to push through this pool screen. But yeah, you keep them in a pot and you can move them around if it starts to freeze. But these are very cool. These are ferns that grow upright. The stem is made of the fronds of the leaves as they die. Okay, so that's that. We'll do the gymnosperms and the angiosperms in part 2. Thank you.